when I was writing my first microservice, I thought that a certain set of frameworks, new methodologies like DDD, and new tools would allow me to change an old system that no one really wanted to work with to something new and fun, and shiny. Many years later, now, I know that the code and the technology is not enough to make a real change. And change happens because of the people. My name is Michał Łosiewicz, and I wanted to tell you how it worked for us and why in the past 3 months we delivered more than in the previous year. Lots of companies struggle with the monolith, and they want to migrate to microservices because of scaling issues, because of the speed of developing new features. But how to approach the splitting of monolith? What's the first idea that comes to your mind? What's the first thing that you would like to do? Well, ours was to define some domains and break it down. We kind of almost ended up with a pile of stones that didn't relate to each other in any way. What you really want is to have clear boundaries for your services, clear context defined, and services laid out in a way that makes sense, that allow them to communicate with each other. What you want is transparency in your system design and extendability through clearly defined boundaries. My first week in Azimo looked like this. I came to work. I just got an assignment. Developing a service for mobile notifications. Well, it was one of those domains we defined when splitting, conceptually splitting up the monolith. It was one of those low-hanging fruit domains, so it should be kind of easy. So I'm sitting there since my first week. I'm coding first, asking questions later. So I'm writing the API, I'm connecting to the stream, found some libraries to do the Google and Apple notifications, so I'm using that. I'm using the service my colleague wrote to publish SMSs. And I push my jar to Nexus. What happens next is I'm asking people around what to do with my jar, how to deploy that to production. Well, that was the first time I heard the term bieda-stage. In English, it might be something like poor man's stage. It's an environment, it's a staging environment where you don't really have a staging environment. In our case, it was an environment composing all the services in Docker Compose with some magic scripts downloading artifacts inside those Docker containers. And the idea was sound. It was to mimic the developer local environment so that any developer could set up the microservices on his own computer. Well, it didn't really work. As you can imagine, setting up one machine with Docker Compose of all the services we wanted to create or we created, not really doable. Especially since our production environment was not based on Docker at all. We didn't have a single container. We were based on EC2 instances in Amazon, in AWS Cloud. The problem with that approach was that we were still in the mindset of the monolith. And our monolith was deployed almost manually. Well, there were scripts, but they were run manually. And the amount of machines was finite, and we didn't need to add new machines every single day. We didn't need to add new databases. And we tried to approach doing the microservices in the same way, mostly delegating all the work to our DevOps team and waiting for them to create machines, create databases, do everything for us. At that time, my CTO suggested us all to read a book, actually read a couple of books. One of those was the Phoenix Project by Jenkins, and there's a saying there that being able to take needless work out of the system is more important than being able to put more work into the system. We were so focused on splitting the monolith, delivering new features, doing new stuff, that we didn't automate whatever we could. So even though we created lots of services, the deployments were still manual. The pipelines were still almost manual and copy-pasted. It didn't have a chance to work. So our attempt to do the microservices was based on, like I said, EC2 instances. And to do that, it is not an easy task. So building your own orchestration or choreography tool is not easy. You probably don't even think about things that can go wrong, and the guys that created those exemplary technologies have already fixed in their software. So the first thing, in my opinion, to start working microservices is to pick a tool for orchestration. When you want to pick that tool and you task your developers and DevOps with the same thing to pick a tool, you'll get two different tools. So they have to talk to each other, and they have to pick one that works for all of them. In choosing a tool, experience in using that is vital. So if you have a member of your team that has used one of those before and knows what works there and what doesn't, you might use their experience and include that in your discussions. And keep in mind that creators of those tools have certain assumptions about how the system should work. And in my experience, those assumptions are not the same as the guys who are actually doing the systems, creating those. So there's always some hack you have to do. There's always some approach you have to change because you're using one of those systems. So like the talk before this one, the first step should be to version your infrastructure. And there's a lot of tools. We've seen Terraform and Ansible to do that. The versioning of your infrastructure gives you transparency because you know where your infrastructure is defined and how to define that. By infrastructure in here, I mean, especially in the cloud context, the setup of VMs, so what kind of machines are where, network, maybe if you don't need to version your network, then don't, but try this. Also, provisioning of those machines, so Ansible scripts. And when I was writing my service and started working in Azimo, I was looking for a DevOps guy that would run all the scripts we had at once for all our environments. Well, I didn't find anyone willing to do that. Maybe they were not crazy enough. So don't just version your infrastructure. Run your scripts every day or whenever there is a change, and run all of them. Don't do Ansible minus tag and just update Kafka and don't update anything else, right? Run all your scripts. When you version the infrastructure, it's also easy to contribute to that. So when you have developers that require databases, they don't have to go to DevOps and ask them, create a new database for me and give me access to that, right? Whenever you create a microservice, it requires a new database, and there's like 20 people creating microservices. Every day, you get 20 requests a day to create a database for you. Well, maybe less. But imagine what the DevOps guys have to do each time they get 20 requests to create a database. It's not doable. So any developer can then pitch in, add 10 lines of code, have new database, that's it. When developing my service, and when I tried to push the notifications to Google or Apple, I needed to store my keys and passwords somewhere. And when I asked DevOps guys, again, how to do that, how to put my keys into the environment so that my service can download that and can work with that, well, they told me, use the vault. Okay, but how do I use it? How to access that vault? Here's the IP. And any password? Well, I can't get you the password. So how am I supposed to do that? Create a task for us, we'll do that later. And 1 month later, nothing happened, right? So DevOps guys, maybe try to share those passwords with developers so that they can do the thing for themselves, so they can store that in your code. Maybe hash it, maybe, I don't know, cipher it, do something about that, but they're not always the guys who break everything. If you give them the password, it might probably work without breaking all the things around that. Also, one more thing that was mentioned in the presentation before, keep your pipelines in the code. That's very important. And like Jakub said, conventions over configuration, that's a good idea, but configuration is not always that bad. For example, we have Scala, Java, and Go on production, and we have pipelines for all those technologies for services. I can't imagine a situation where we have one pipeline written for both Scala, Java, and Go based on conventions. Just, no, it won't work. But Jenkins has some cool feature. It's called shared library. And if you use that, you can have Jenkins based on the code in your Git repository define the pipelines for you. So instead of having Jenkins file with the whole pipeline defined in every service, you can just create a function in shared library and run that function in every service repository to create the pipelines for you. What you get for free is when you want to add a step or change a step, you don't have to modify all the services repositories. You can just modify the shared library and everything gets propagated to all the services. And standards help in automation, and automation helps to enforce standards. So when there are certain files required by your services to be present in the repository, like Jenkins requires Jenkins file, for example, you can generate those files for your services. So whenever you want to create a service, you don't start with creating a new repository empty and just copy-paste from somewhere else. You can have a script to generate the required files and the structure for you. Maven archetypes, Giterate, something like that. Also, standards help when you, for example, unify access to database. So if you have the same access to database in all the services through some other service, for example, and you have unified creation of those databases in your infrastructure scripts, then adding a new database is 10 lines of code. You deploy your service on production, you get that, and it works. Because it's tested with every new service creation, every new database creation. But you don't get all of that without a team. And Patrick Lancioni, in his 5 dysfunctions of a team, wrote that if we don't trust one another, then we aren't going to engage in open, constructive ideological conflict, and we'll just continue to preserve a sense of artificial harmony. There are two very important things about this. The first one is trust. When you work in a team, and by team, I don't mean a bunch of developers sitting in one room, rarely communicating with each other, maybe via Slack from time to time, or a bunch of DevOps sitting in another room, not communicating with the developers because they're busy. I mean, a team is where you share the same goal, and you can trust other people in the team that they have the same devotion and dedication to their work, and they want the same quality of your work. So that's the trust in the team. I know that lots of people say that conflict is a bad thing. Actually, an open, honest conflict is a very good thing. So when you argue with your colleagues about a tool you want to use, if you're honest with yourself that your arguments are not no because I don't want to, and your colleague does the same thing, then you're bound to have a good solution. You're bound to come up with an idea that helps all of you. Building a team is not an easy thing, and it hurts. It can hurt a lot. We had a lot of issues because we're all introverts, almost all of us in Azimo, and building a team took a long of time, a lot of face-to-face conversations about what works and what doesn't work in everyday communication. Also, lots of workshops based on how do we want to approach certain things. So it's not enough to define a certain process inside your organization that this task goes to developers, DevOps, testers, and then to production. The process means nothing if you don't have a team, because still communicating via Jira, communicating via Slack, good for remote, but like the first presentation for GeeCON, right? If you're not human in all of that, if your relations get moved to some artificial world, then there's no good communication. There's no team in that. When you have that, you should introduce failure into your system. Seriously, make it fail. Make your ops guys do the drunk admin test. They love it. And obviously don't do that on production, but when you do that on staging or pre-production environment, then just treat those failures as they were in real production. Learn from it. And when you learn from it, when you fix your system, then run it again and again and again until what you have is good enough for production. But also keep in mind that you won't make your solution perfect. That's unachievable. But deploy that to production whenever you can, whenever you think it's good enough, because if you don't, then it goes to the drawer, no one's using it, you might as well start over again. And another quote from the Phoenix project to sum this up. We're hearing more lately something called DevOps. Maybe everyone attending this party is a form of DevOps, but I suspect it's something much more than that. It's product management, it's development, IT operations, and even information security, all working together and supporting one another. If you don't talk with your managers, don't talk with your DevOps, then you're not at your full potential. You can do more. Thank you. I wish you all creative work environments and lots of deployments every day.